Hello and welcome to Team Franco Bodybuilding Podcast. This is Joe, your host, the one and only, and I promise you guys, one of these days I'm going to have someone on. I it's my fault. All right. Of course, I'm hoping you guys are getting it done both in and out of the gym. I almost forgot. And today's topic, I'm going to talk about the gym. But before I dig deeper, I just want you to know that whatever I cover today and the topics of my top 5 of things that I've actually changed beliefs has no reflection on saying that you can't do them. I just want to bring some truth to the whole idea of how weight training has evolved. And basically the reason being that I feel I'm an expert at this is because I've been weight training, good Lord, 35 years, been coaching for well over 25, went through physical therapy, thousands of clients, and we always learned that there's different ways of skinning the cat. But even to this day, some of us still are old school. And that's why I want to cover my top 5 old school training beliefs that I've changed over the years. And that's through a number of factors which contributing to this podcast. And I also say science. That's the cool thing about, even 20 years ago, we did not have the availability of these great young scientists actually studying and analyzing weight training to give us, an idea of what works and what doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying everything is absolute that we've learned, but at least it narrows things down so we don't waste our time in the gym, because ultimately, when we train, yes, we want to be happy with the workout. Yes, we want to be consistent with the workout. But you want it to be effective, right? I mean, unless you're just going to the gym for a for a socialization or to meet people or to hang out with your friends, that's great. But I've always been about efficiency. I go into my home gym, I want to crush it. I want to do what is most optimal for me at this age, make the workouts effective, and still push myself as hard as I can with the proper recovery. That's the blanket statement that we all should be going for. But I've also learned over the years that sometimes you got to change directions. You got to change paths. You have to learn to adapt. And that's not only through myself, but also coaching some clients, where every once in a while I will have clients that will say, well, I saw XYZ exercise, so it must work. Or I've been doing this for so long, I've had great results, but now it's just, hurting my hip flexors. I still want to do it. Well, no, that's really what I want to cover and, in this episode, and talk about things that I have learned, that you realize that sometimes the things that you swore by, it's not saying it's wrong, but you can try a different path to make things effective. So these are 5 old school training beliefs. I bought into these years ago when I first started personal training. I would teach them, I live by them. But I would say that I've changed my stance, again, through experience, coaching, injuries, and just seeing what works in the real world. So we're in a golden age of lots of information. And I'm hoping I can be one of those sources of information for you guys. So the first one I want to talk about, and I was guilty of this probably all the way up until 2019. So for maybe the first 30 years of my weight training, I always would suggest to clients and for myself to lead off with a compound exercise. Compound exercise. That's basically multi-jointed movements where you're working multiple muscle groups. And of course, they're the big 3. Flat bench barbell press, squat with a bar, and of course, deadlifts with a bar. I used to believe that if you didn't start with your workout with a big compound lift, the workout didn't count. And I can tell you now, the reason why I felt that way was because of my ego, right? You'd have to squat first all the time, bench, deadlift, because obviously, and it does make sense if you still do that and you want to do it, because you're warming the entire body up, or those muscle groups up that you're going to hit and you're going to fine tune with the accessory work. But again, if you have any kind of injury, or if you just don't connect to it, it's not going to be as effective. Over the years, I just realized that exercise order is more individual, and it's not necessarily should be a written way. Now, for beginners, maybe it's needed, so then we learn what works best for them. But what's also important is fatigue management, joint health, and then obviously you've heard me talk about this all the time, mind-muscle connection. Because just sometimes if you're so focused on chasing the weight, chasing to lift certain, reps or low reps with high weight just because it gets sexy that you're getting stronger, it just may not be that effective, and you may lose the proper form for executing that exercise. Conversely, sometimes leading off with an isolation movement actually lets you perform the compound lift a little bit better. Sometimes doing a machine leg press, doing a leg extension, leg curl, can actually help enhance when you do the compound exercise because you safely warmed up the area, your knees, your hips, and then therefore you can concentrate even though you're not using as much weight, and it'll be just as effective. I probably started doing this a few years ago, and in my latest podcast I did a thing about my lower body training. When I'm targeting the quads, the anterior part of my lower body, I always lead off with leg extensions. Conversely, I always lead off with leg curls for posterior chain. And then I go into a hack squat, only because I can't squat or deadlift. And you've heard me say that 1,000 times. So what I'm trying to drive home, don't get caught up just because we used to do it. Get caught up on learning what works best for you. So that's the first old school belief that you always had to lead off. I've changed my ways, and I think it could be really beneficial for those with injuries or just don't have the natural structure to do that certain exercise. Because we have so much to choose from, you really want to focus on what's best for you. And the second one, and it ties into the first one, is that you have to squat, you have to deadlift, you have to flat bench press if you want the gains. Now, I absolutely believe that if you weren't doing the big three, just like leading off, you weren't training seriously. That was my belief. That's what I was taught by reading the old school books. That's what I did. But then, starting to coach hundreds and hundreds of people, learning about different limb lengths, injuries, goals, I realized something really fast. Not everyone is built the barbell squat. Not everyone should be doing deadlifts. Not everyone can functionally do a flat bench press with proper form. Now, again, it's not a bad thing. There are multiple ways to load the movement patterns effectively. So pick a machine, pick a dumbbell, free weights, cables. Again, it all comes down to mind-muscle connection. I do believe if you can do these exercises without any issues, then you keep them in. But I'm saying if it comes to a point in time that if you have an injury or if you're just not connecting to a back squat, it's okay to switch it out for something that is going to be very similar. And that is a hack squat or a pendulum squat or whatever. I mean, I go into these gyms nowadays and they got all this funky stuff, which is great, even though I don't think it's always needed. But you have options. So don't get it caught up in your head that you have to lead off with the main exercises or you even have to do them to be effective. Because what science has also shown us is that stretch is really important. Time under tension is important. Full range of motion is important. And then when people do these main three lifts, again, like what I talked about earlier, they get so caught up on trying to get stronger. And I actually did a whole podcast about this. When people get stronger, they chase the numbers. So quite often, they may not be doing the form properly. They may increase the chances of getting hurt. And they may not be training efficient, like I touched upon in the beginning of this podcast, where people will just do exercises to do them without the efficiency and getting the progress that they're after. So again, the first two kind of go hand in hand, and I'm here to tell you 2026 that you don't even have to do the three exercises. There are multiple ways of skinning the cat, but I'm not telling you not to. If you are successful, you have great form, you connect, stick with them. I, on the other hand, can't just because of overuse, hip, rib, whatever, all these little things that add up. So I've learned to train properly for my body and my age. The third one, again, this was something that I was actually taught in school, that certain rep ranges actually mattered for different avenues of growth. And now science is showing us, and this is going to be a quick one, anything between 5 to 30 repetitions, as long as you're getting close to failure, you're still going to have the same muscle fatigue, the same hypertrophy that you're after. Because way back when, 8 to 12 was like the magic range. Anything outside of that was wrong. Now, I couldn't really care less about the number as much. Although I do prescribe workouts, and I do a little old school thought, if you are doing a heavy lead off, I like you to be around the 5 to 6 range, still enough time under tension, not powerlifting where you do 1, 2, or 3 reps, where you're really focusing on strength, nervous system, but then you can basically setting up for joint pain in the future. So I personally like doing stuff between 6 and 20 reps. For the heavier stuff, your working sets should be at 6. For the light stuff, single joint type movements like laterals, curls, extensions, you can do the higher rep range because it is safer and you're not going to have that axial fatigue and you can really rep it out. If you want to stick with 10 reps for every single exercise, you can do that too. That is something that has been actually a relief because back in the day, I would have all these questions. Well, I should be doing this, endurance rep range is, anything more than 15 or, muscle building rep range is 8 to 12. Strength is 1 to 3. I think it's basically taking a lot of the guesswork out, thinking that you have to do a certain amount of reps, where low reps were for strength, mid reps basically again for hypertrophy, and high reps for endurance. That was once bodybuilding law, where you would read books about it. And while there's some truth, it's just been massively oversimplified. What we learn, both through research and real world results, is that hypertrophy happens across a wide range of reps. Muscle growth is driven by the mechanical tension and effort, not the rep range. Your body doesn't understand rep ranges. So therefore, find the rep ranges that work for you and stick with them. Again, you don't want to be mixing it up. Now, number 5, and again, this is a biggest pet peeve of mine, where I used to believe this in a little bit, especially when I first started out personal training about 25 years ago or even more. And maybe it was because I was trying to keep clientele on, is that I always thought you had to change the routine really frequently to shock the muscle. The muscle confusion error. That's what I call it. I used to think variety was the key to progress. New exercises every few weeks. Keeps the body guessing, right? And maybe it will get you sore, but usually that soreness is because you're not used to doing that exercise. But the problem with that, and you've heard me say this over and over again, probably over the last couple of years, if you're constantly changing the movements, you can't measure overload. You can't improve the execution. You can't track the progress as well. And it's because you're jumping ship. Flat bench press lead off for 2 weeks. Oh, let me do a dumbbell fly for the next 2 weeks. Oh, I want to do, well, you're not getting better. Repetitions, no pun intended, or doing something over and over, you're going to get better. It's going to become more effective. Muscles don't need to be shocked. They need to be progressively challenged over time. That is basically it. Now, variety does have its place, but consistency to me is the really foundation. Now, what I do personally, I'll keep the same lead-off exercises for a lot of my programs that I write. But I will then give them 3 options, although I want them to stick with the option for anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, because I think that's the magic area where if you stick with a routine for, let's just call it a month, you're giving yourself enough time to learn the exercise, you're giving yourself enough time to progress, and enough time before you get bored. And then I give the option to my clients saying, if you want to change, go ahead, change. If you want to stick with the same exercises and stick with routine A, have at it. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's only because if you're in a groove with a certain routine, stick with it. Don't feel like, oh, it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I got to change. No, that's nonsense. And I think a lot of coaches will sell that to people. Maybe that's their way of having them hang on. But I've learned over the years, again, through science, self-practice, is that sticking to the same exercises plays a bigger role as far as the progress that we're after, instead of thinking that we got to shock the muscle. So just to review the top 5. And again, these are all things that I used to think that we had to do to have progress. And the first one, of course, is that you always have to lead off with a compound exercise. No, that's not true. If you connect with the exercise, you're making great progress, have at it. But don't feel that it's mandatory. And number 2, very similar to the first one, that you have to do a back squat, you have to do conventional deadlifts, and you have to do flat bench press. Not at all. You can mix it up with dumbbells, cables, all the fancy machines that most of these new high-tech gyms have. You don't. Because what I've also learned, and I touched upon, is that we all have different structures, limb lengths. You know, even though back squatting to me is one of the greatest exercises someone can do, but if their femurs are really long, they're going to have the worst hip flexion, and they're going to be doing back bends just to try to get the bar down low. That's just one example. Or vice versa. You know, if their tibias are really long, your knee to your ankle, well, deadlifting may be harder just because of the greater travel and be compromising their back. Or if someone has really long arms, well, maybe a barbell bench press, or they'll have the flexibility in their shoulder. So that's just an example that natural genetics does play a role into the exercises that you connect to. So don't feel obligated that you have to do those top 3. If you do connect, that's awesome. Third one, again, talked about the rep ranges. There is no magic rep range. Now, unless you're going for powerlifting, yeah, you stick with the singles, doubles, and triples. But anything between 5 and 6 reps to 20 reps in my book is key. But the key is also stick with the same rep ranges for the different exercises that you're doing. If you want to do 10 reps for your incline dumbbell press and then you go to flies, you want to do 15, that's cool too. You can have that variety in there for mental stimulus. But what I'm trying to say is that you want to be consistent with the rep range for all the exercises. And the 5th one, again, shocking the muscle is just plain bullshit. It's not going to do anything. Sticking with the exercises for a longer period of time, I know it can get boring, but you're going to have more progress. So that is really the key. Now, I hope that this has been helpful. You know, most of these beliefs basically were beliefs, what I learned from books. I'm not just saying that they're wrong. They're just incomplete. Because with time, we learn. Experience teaches us that training isn't about rules. It's about outcomes. It's about sustainability. It's about building a body that performs well and lasts. If your training philosophy hasn't evolved over the years, or you feel like you have to do a certain thing because it worked for you 10 years, then you're not paying attention. I'm going to sign off, guys. Hopefully this has been helpful. Again, I appreciate all your support. If you like this, let me know. If there's a topic you want to hear about, let me know. I'll talk to you next time.